Hey, what's going on, everybody? How you guys doing? Welcome back to Podio Commentary. My name is Matt Jarbo. Today, we're going to be talking about The Mandalorian and Grogu, the newest release of a Star Wars film in theaters in about 6.5 years, following the rise of Skywalker, a movie that tried to please everybody, but ultimately pleased no one. And here, it might actually go the exact opposite direction, where it's really only trying to please a very subsect group of people, or maybe it's only angering a subset group of people. I'm not too sure, and I don't necessarily care what other people think of these films. This is one that I've been excited for ever since it was announced back during, I think, in 2024. But the thing where this movie originated was that, we got seasons 1, seasons 2, and seasons 3 of The Mandalorian. Obviously, there was the Return of the Mandalorian TV series, or episode of Book of Boba Fett. And then since then, it's been kind of quiet on the TV side of things for where things are going to go with these characters. And this particular movie was one that was created because Disney was like, okay, we need to reevaluate where we are, and we need to figure out what is going to get fans excited in Star Wars again. And right now, the number one thing that we're pushing merchandise-wise is Baby Yoda. And they understand that, right? They understand that Grogu is a big moneymaker, an insane moneymaker for Disney. And they were thinking, this is what we're going to have to do, is we're going to go and make a movie about the Mandalorian and Grogu, and Dave Filoni will, write it, co-write it, and direct it, and everything else. So it seems on paper like that's just kind of a slam dunk, right? First 2 seasons of The Mandalorian, very well received. Season Book of Boba Fett, I think for the most part well received, especially when the Mandalorian shows up. And then, season 3 of the show stumbled and fell a little bit, I think, but ultimately, I think, landed the plane. And the way that show ended is kind of, where the show itself might have ended, with kind of the Mandalorian and Grogu living together and finding peace, getting their own plot of land on Navarro and everything like that. And then this movie picks up where now he's just clearing the deck for the New Republic and being an independent freelance contractor that is hired to go on in and to eliminate the deck of cards. Now, the great thing about the deck of cards is it actually goes back to like George Bush era politics, which is very much what Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith were kind of based on. So I always thought that was kind of fascinating, right? If you don't know what I'm talking about and you're too young to know what I'm talking about, back during Operation, not Desert Storm, it was Iraqi Freedom, that's what it was. We had a deck of 52 cards. And those deck of cards were the top terrorists that were in Iraq under the Saddam regime that we wanted to get rid of. It was a whole marketing thing. Literally, you could get a deck of playing cards with those people, their faces on there. And I think even like the Ace of Spades was Saddam himself. And this is very similar to that. And so now Mando's got to go and work for the Hutt twins in order to be able to then find out information on the Ace of Spades, right? The number one Imperial remnant that can like basically lay out everything that's going on, what the Empire is up to, following the fall of the Empire on the final battle of Jakku. That's never talked about, but I'm just kind of putting that in there. And so then Mando goes off to rescue Rada the Hutt. Well, where does Rada come from? Obviously, Rada comes from the Clone Wars animated film that kicked off the franchise back in 2008. Arguably, probably the worst received part of that entire series that ran for as long as it did was that opening movie that they did release in theaters, but that's where we got to meet Rada, and that's also our introduction to Ahsoka. So this is very much a Dave Filoni side of it, right? And I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. We're going to be able to put Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau in a very, kind of standalone Star Wars adventure that's going to then be able to kind of probably call back from things that we know as fans and that they love to talk about. And this feels like it's probably going to end up being something that's like a love letter to fans. Well, yeah, that's exactly what it is. Because who is Mando teaming up with throughout the course of this thing? Zeb from Rebels, which, by the way, hail to the yeah. Zeb is awesome. Love Zeb on the show. But I was waiting for at that point in time, if you're going to have Zeb show up, and he did in season 3 of Mando, and that brief cameo, where is everybody else? And I think that is a big question that a lot of people have. Where is everybody else? So again, it being very standalone, it not being connected to anything else like Ahsoka or anything going on with like Luke Skywalker or Han or Leia or anything that we would know from like what they're trying to apparently do with the Heir to the Empire movie or series that Filoni is cooking up with Thrawn and everything. This is just like it's a tease in many ways. Because even though, yes, we know it's standalone, even though it's low stakes, even though it is very much its own thing, it's still, you're waiting, almost like the best way I can describe it is, remember when you were watching Star Trek with J.J. Abrams' Star Trek from 2009 and the lens flares were on the outskirts of everything and you're like, why are the lens flares there? Well, J.J. Abrams describes that as being something interesting happening off screen. And I thought that was kind of a cool aesthetic to the movie. Here, I'm like waiting for like what's happening off screen to then come on in. It never does, right? We get a couple of cameos from Deborah Chow and Dave Filoni and Ricky Famuyiwa, which was great because that's an awesome callback to Chapter 5 of Season 1, the Prison Break episode, where they all played X-Wing pilots. And they even show up in the final battle of this movie, well, minus Deborah Chow. That was kind of weird that she wasn't there for that. But I almost felt that was a commentary on like her work with the book of the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, where, her work on the first season of Mandalorian was so good on those 2 episodes she directed that they then gave her the entirety of Kenobi. Kenobi was kind of, well, it had a lot of problems. And then we haven't heard anything out of Deborah Chow since. And so then here she's got like a 1-second cameo and then she's gone again. And you're going like, I wonder if that was, a choice, but either way, it's like, hey, look, remember her? We remember her. We're going to throw her a bone, but we're never going to talk about her again. And I don't think Dave Filoni or Favreau are like that. I just feel it was kind of odd to have her sitting there prominently featured in the shot and then not show up in that final battle sequence as one of the fighter pilots. That would have been cool. I was like the only thing with that kind of bothered me. Even though it's such a nitpick that doesn't even mean anything to anyone. So like the thing that I really enjoyed is when they got to the planet, the moon, to go find Rada, and Rada is a gladiator fighter. And that reminded me very much of Thor Ragnarok with the Hulk being Gladiator Hulk, right? It felt very similar. But one of the things I noticed is when they showed the top-down shot of looking down at the arena had a battle chess layout on it. And I just thought that was kind of interesting. I was like, oh, I like that. All right, that's a little Star Wars, A New Hope reference there. All right, I can dig it. I like. All right, cool. And then I'll say this. I'm just going to spoil this. When later on they had to fight Mando and Rada had to fight all of these other creatures, and they're all the battle chess creatures we saw Chewie and C-3PO using as chess pieces back in A New Hope, complete with like the one guy with the long neck grabbing the other big guy and knocking him down. I was like, oh, hell yeah, dude. That was such a great callback. And it was little things like that, I feel, that kind of really like brought the world of the Mandalorian and Grogu to life. Even if at times it did feel like the show was running on television pacing rather than movie pacing. And I kind of want to touch upon that for a second, because that is a big point of contention between people who like this movie and people who don't like this movie. The people who like this movie obviously love The Mandalorian as a TV show and they love him as a character. The people who don't like this movie are, I think, well, for one, snobs, but two, I think they might be looking at this through the wrong lens, right? This is a long, very long episode of the show. This is like 3 or 4 episodes kind of crammed together, and it's paced like 3 or 4 episodes are crammed together. And that is a big problem. Even I was noticing it a little bit as I was watching it. Like you would have these like great moments of just like awesome action and great, it just like the score was fantastic and you're totally into it. And then it just kind of like cuts to like them doing something rather mundane, almost like the pacing of a TV show. And I'm just wondering how much of that was done intentionally. Because I saw a tweet yesterday that I do not agree with, but I saw someone say, I can't believe he did it. I can't believe Jon Favreau forgot how to make a movie. And I know that's what he's referring to. And I was like, I don't think that's necessarily fair, but I think they were stuck. Because, I always make these comments when they turn a TV show into a movie. And like with the, let's say, The Simpsons and Bob's Burgers, for example, right? Animated shows would kind of hear me out. The animated show is flat 2D. But then when they do the movie, they make it 3D with a lot of extra shadows, right? Or 2D, 2.5D kind of, with just extra shadows and shading in order to make it look more cinematic, to make it look like it was designed for the big screen, right? To set it apart from its counterpart. And I always thought that was kind of weird. Well, here they shot the thing just like they do the show. Actually, they used way more practical sets this time around, and they didn't use the volume as much. But the lighting was still really dark in a few places. That was also something that was an issue with the show. And you could feel that this was something that was on a smaller scale. And I really wonder how much of that is kind of negatively impacting people who went to go see this, for them expecting to get something that is going to be a big cinematic tour de force, you know what I'm saying, rather than a smaller scale, long form episode of a TV show. Right. And that is where I think like the biggest issue lies with the overall pacing of the movie. The action scenes, oh my God, the action scenes are utterly fantastic. You get Brendan Wayne and Lateef Crowder doing their thing. And I got to say, I love the fact that they also got top billing in the opening of the movie, right? It says Pedro Pascal, then it says Brendan Wayne, then Lateef Crowder. And that was great because, yeah, we're seeing Brendan and Lateef on screen, with Pedro being in the costume some of the times, more than usual, because his mask is off for like the last act of the film. But in this particular case, we are getting a lot of that, and a lot of those guys, and they're getting their due on that one. And I thought that was pretty cool. Whether or not that's like Screen Actors Guild rules or not, I have no idea. But it's still nice to see. Also, fun fact, if you didn't know this, Brendan Wayne, the gunslinger, is actually the grandson of John Wayne. So that's kind of cool, right? I like there's some, pedigree there, I guess. Maybe that's a weird word to use, but it's kind of how I feel about it. So like the movie, again, like it goes into like, they rescue Rada, and then they, send Rada away, and they capture the bad guy, and, everything else. And then we get into the last act of the movie where the Hutts want their revenge. And I really enjoyed the last act of the film quite a bit, with the exception of one thing. So this is where I think the movie is not operating on a 3-act structure, but a 4-act structure. Because at one point, I guess I don't even know if you'd want to call it like halfway through the middle act or at the beginning of the 3rd act. It's a weird thing. The movie grinds itself to a halt. Okay. It grinds itself to a halt. The Mandalorian is taken out of commission, and he is down for the count. Now everything focuses on Grogu, which is completely understandable for the sake of character development. That's why the movie is called The Mandalorian and Grogu. It's not just The Mandalorian. It is, you have character growth and development with the little guy. And we get about, I don't know how long it felt. It felt like 10 minutes or so of him like walking through the woods, trying to, find out where he's at, learn where he is at, stay alive, and then figure out how to save Mando, and while also keeping Mando safe. And it's a great moment. It is a really, really, really good moment in the movie, but it also feels like it does run on a little bit too long. In fact, I would make the argument that the movie itself could be about maybe 10 minutes shorter and probably really feel more tightly paced, because this is a pulpy action adventure story that then does grind itself to this halt where all the escalation falls short. And if you don't know anything about pulp stories and escalation, you never want to have it grind itself down like that. But I understand why they did it. And it's one that I think is probably a gigantic point of contention for a lot of people. But I did enjoy watching Grogu learn, and I did enjoy watching Grogu grow, and then it did lead to a great finale, which there's this awesome part where he saves Mando, and they find, okay, a couple things with this. I have to, this is where things get a little bit dodgy with the editing. So Mando gets captured at his home in Navarro. Okay, then he gets put in handcuffs, put on the bounty hunter ship, taken over to Nal Hutta, sorry. And then he ends up, fighting the giant snake that poisons him. And he's not using his gun at all. And earlier on when he was captured, he loses his gun, but then kind of magically gets it back. And then here, you would assume he would lose his gun, like the bounty hunter droid would have disarmed him, because he had him handcuffed in front rather than in back. And then when he falls into the pit, ends up fighting the snake, gets out, and then collapses. When he wakes up, he's checking his gun. So how did he get his gun again? Right? And then they find the ship, the gunrunner ship, that ended up taking Rada off Navarro and then got shot down or whatever, crashed now Hutta, to put Rada back in I guess you could say the prisoner of the Hutts, right? Well, when they find it, it's like, how long had it been? Because that ship was like overgrown with weeds. It was, I know it was partly submerged, but it wasn't like freshly partly submerged. It was like overgrown with weeds. Like it had been there for a minute. So there is some timing and some logistical plot holes that occur. Now, I need to watch the movie again. I'll absolutely watch the movie again. And when I do, I'll be able to know more. But in the meantime, I'm just kind of going like, what is going on with this? Like, I don't quite get it. That part kind of threw me off. But then we get into this moment where like they make sure the ship is working, and they're like, we can run and the Hutts will keep coming after us, or we can stay and fight. Right. And the Mando doesn't like to turn down a fight anyway. He doesn't like violence, as he likes to say, but he knows what he's got to do. And then Grogu's like, all right, let's go. So then we get into like video game logic territory, which I thought was really funny because this is a gunrunner ship. So what does the gunrunner have? Tons of guns. By the way, he also has the gun that the Mandalorian used in the first season of the show with like the rifle and like the shock tip on front. So then we get this like really great action sequence where they're trying to storm on into the palace in order to save Rada and take out the Hutts. Well, you've also got the incoming X-Wings who are then going to be off, basically kind of out of their jurisdiction, but doing a rescue mission in order to get them out of there. And it's a great kind of like ticking clock moment where they got to get out of there before everything blows up. And what I really enjoyed was the fight scene at the end where you've got Mando versus the bounty hunter. You've got Rada versus his aunt and uncle who are trying to kill him. And then you've got Grogu versus the bounty hunter's dog. So you get this great pulpy action adventure situation of all three groups of people engaging with their own fight. And this is very similar to like that shot in Temple of Doom when you've got Indy and he's punching the big Tuggy Colt guy, and then the camera pulls back and they're short round and he's punching up on the prince. It's that kind of pulp adventure shot, that kind of hardcore Lucasfilm Temple of Doom love shot. So I really enjoyed that sequence quite a bit. And then, they get out of there, like the Hutts fall into the pit, get eaten by the snake, which was really great because you, for one, see them die, which is awesome. And two, when the snake descends back into the water, you get to see the two big lumps inside. He's digesting them. I think that's a great detail. And the design on that snake and other creatures were pretty fantastic. There was also a scene in the swamps where Grogu gets swallowed by a frog creature. And I believe that frog creature, I forget the name of it, is actually from Star Wars Fallen Order, right? Or Jedi Survivor. So I feel like that was a reference to the video games. And then, of course, we get the video game logic with the ship a minute later. So there's definitely a lot of love that went into this. And then, I got to also point out one of my favorite things about it was the return of the Razor Crest, because Mando's like, how did you get it? And then Sigourney Weaver's like, oh, yeah, so we actually found an old Imperial commander was hoarding a whole bunch of ships, and we just took it back from him, which is totally a reference to the Nazis stealing, the assets, art, whatever of the Jews, and then holding on to it. Here they're like, no, we found this old Imperial ship. We want to give it to you. This is our gift to you because we know you lost yours, and we want to make sure that you're back to normal. And so that was a great way of kind of explaining it, and also again kind of honoring like where the story of Star Wars came from, of what the Empire represented and everything. And I thought that was actually a really cool little detail. And that's what this movie has. This movie has a lot of really cool little details that, yes, run into some pacing issues every once in a while. There's definitely some problems here and there, but it is a fun time. My 8-year-old daughter, she loved it. She wants to watch it again. I want to watch it again. I don't know if I would go see it again in theaters. I had a bad experience. There were people sitting next to me that were just really shitty. But I do want to watch it again on home video, and I want to watch it again, and just kind of like enjoy it for what it is. So I don't think this is a bad movie. I think it does exactly what it sets out to do. There are some glaring issues with it. that I think were choices that were made deliberately to keep the TV people happy, which is not great because this was a movie, and the two, while similar, are not the same. But those are just my thoughts on it. What did you guys think about it? Let me know down in the comments section. If you're new here, be sure to check out Podio commentary, other reviews I do of movies, and I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you very much. Have yourself a great day, and peace out.